Now, back to the Morning Roast with Bonta and Shasky.
All around the world, same song.
Was this the Tupac first appearance?
Yeah, I think so. It's a hitter.
Yeah, it is.
It's a hitter.
You know who
Rest
had
in
hitters?
peace, Shock G.
Joe Starkey.
Joe Starkey did have
All my
hitters.
favorite calls growing up had Joe Starkey in them.
We'll get him on the phone in just a second. Damn, I love Starkey. We're getting old, man.
I know.
We're getting old.
He's
I don't
a legend.
like this.
He's a legend.
He's a legend. I don't like that Joe Starkey's walking away. I mean, he should. He deserves it.
You know what
He's been
I think
calling
of?
Cal games since 1975.
Well, and the 49ers, I believe,
Right.
since the mid-'80s. When I think of Joe Starkey, I would run to the restroom at the old Tross
Yes.
at Candlestick.
Oh, yeah.
And they would have the game
He was
on
the
the
soundtrack.
radio, and he
Yep.
was the soundtrack of me using the restroom and trying to hustle back, and I never missed a second of football that way.
The way Starkey, because you're driving into Candlestick, you may be late, or
Yes.
if you're leaving early, the way he just let the game breathe.
It was the best.
And it's just the tone he set. It was Niner football. It was from 89 to 2008. Joe Starkey was the voice of the 49ers. He's been the voice of the Cal Golden Bears since 1975. But this will be his last season behind the microphone. And Joe, good morning. Welcome back to the Morning Roast. Joe Shasky, the Butcher, Bonta Hill. And I guess the first question is, I guess you don't have to listen to USC's marching band anymore after the season. That may be the best thing about retirement.
Step forward, I must say. There's no doubt about that. As my old partner Grosskep used to say, damn it, every time we play him, the horse will run and the band will play.
No doubt about that.
Joe, when you look back on your career, what do you think your inspiration was? Because like we were just talking about how you're the voice of our youth when it comes to football. I mean, that's what I think of, whether it's the Cal Bears, whether it's the San Francisco 49ers. Who were your influences as a broadcaster?
Well, because I'm a Chicagoan, the guys that I most paid attention to were Chicago announcers, and probably the main guy was probably Jack Brickhouse, because he did everything. He did the Cubs, he did the Sox, he did the Chicago Bears, and so that was definitely somebody I looked up to, and really in many ways was an enormous help of getting into the business. Just for example, a quick story: I was still in banking. I was a vice president of Union Bank in Southern California, and the Cubs were having spring training in Arizona, and I just literally went up to them. I found out what hotel the team was staying at, and I asked if I could speak to you for a while, because they said, I'm from Chicago, and I've heard all your stuff. I said, I'd like to get into broadcasting. So he invited me up to his room. We spent about a half hour. He said, you want to come to the game with me? He says, we'll bring you up to the booth. And I said, that sounds great. So we get up to the broadcast booth, and the Cubs are doing a preseason game, and so help me God. And remember, there's no history between us except this meeting. In the third inning, he says, I got a young man here who thinks he wants to be a sportscaster, so Joe, the inning's yours.
Wow.
What are the odds on that?
So that was the beginning for you?
So that got me started, and he was a big help as I went along. But, Lon Simmons was such a great talent as well. And so there have been a lot of people over the years that have certainly had an influence. Chick Hearn helped me get opportunities. When I lived in Los Angeles working for the bank, he actually got me an interview to work because Jack and Cook owned both the Kings and the Lakers. Chick Hearn got me an interview with the Kings to do their broadcast. I didn't get the job, but he went to bat for me. So I've had guys throughout the years that have had a big influence.
That's awesome, man. That inning, I wonder how that inning went. Do you still have the tape from that inning, Joe?
I wish, no.
Well, let me ask you this, because you've done a lot here. We'll get to the Niners and Cal and what you plan on doing this final season, but I just got through reading a book about the USFL and how crazy that league was, but actually it was really good football. You were the broadcaster. I did not notice until brushing up on your resume last night, but you used to broadcast the Oakland Invader games with Bobby Hebert and Anthony Carter. Now, what was it like to broadcast that league? And do you think that league had a shot to overtake the NFL?
Well, if it wasn't for the idiot that ended up in the White House, the league might still be in business.
Yes, true.
Actually, it's not an exaggeration to say Donald Trump ruined the league. It started in 1983. It lasted 3 years, but Trump bought the New Jersey Generals and demanded that they try to switch to a fall schedule.
Yep.
They were doing quite well in the spring. Tennis was good, television ratings were good, but that put them out of business. But I loved that league. I mean, Herschel Walker played in that league, and you had so many. You had Jim Kelly was a quarterback at Houston.
Yep.
The names that played in that league were really outstanding, and it was good football.
Yeah. So how did you go from doing an inning or at least half an inning of baseball, like fill in the gaps between then and then Cal football
and the Kings and yeah?
Well, what happened is that I was doing tapes. I did tapes of games. I would go sit in the stands when I was still working in L.A. At the bank. I would go to the Forum, and I would tape games of the Lakers and Kings. And then when I got transferred up to San Francisco, I just did the same thing here. I went to Giants games, and I would find an empty booth to do games, or I would go to a Seals hockey game or a Warrior game, and I would just tape them when I felt they were good enough. I actually, on a business interview to Chicago, I called Charlie Finley's office because he owned the Seals, and I just heard that they have their announcer was a guy named Roy Story, and Roy Story had just taken a job with the L.A. Kings, and so in 1972, it appeared that the hockey team would need a new broadcaster, and I grew up playing hockey. I knew the game really well. And so I talked to Mr. Finley in his office in Chicago, and believe it or not, he hired me on the spot after hearing the tape, and then he fired me 5 minutes later. I had made a comment about him because my master's degree from Loyola Chicago is in industrial relations and human resources. I asked him about his turnover, and I said, "You seem to go through people a lot. Maybe I could help you." Well, he took that as an insult, and so he fired me. So I went around him. I went to the radio station. There was a station here years ago called KWEN in San Jose, and I brought them the tape, and they listened, and they hired me. And after the guy said, "You got the job," I said, "No, you need to hear this first about my relationship with the owner." And so he said, "I'll take care of that." And the way he took care of that is the A's were in the World Series in 1972, and up in the owner's booth, the station manager and Finley, the station manager played the tape for him. And in the middle of the game, Finley said, he said, "Okay, the guy sounds like he could be good enough to do this and all that," but he said, "There's something about that voice." He said, "I know that voice." And he apparently stood up and said, "That's a son of a blank so-and-so from the bank. Is that who you want to hire?" And they said, "Yes." He said, "Okay, go do it."
That's awesome, Joe Starkey.
That's incredible.
On the Morning Heroes on 95.70 game. We call it Cal football games since 75. Longtime Niners announcer from 89 to 2008 was pulling double duty for that stretch, and now he's gonna retire after the season in a well-deserved retirement. We're getting into some of the best stories of Joe Starkey. So we know about the call of the band in 82 Cal Stanford.
The play.
We know about What a Bonanza and Owens. We know about all that stuff. What's the best call you feel like you've had that nobody knows about?
That's interesting. I'm not sure that there is anything. I think that those were such seminal moments and such big deals that maybe the one that was heard the least probably may have been that I used a lot of the same adjectives, believe it or not, at Lake Placid at the 80 Russia USA hockey game.
Wow.
I had just come out of the NHL. I'd worked in the NHL with the Seals and then a team called the Colorado Rockies, who ended up being the New Jersey Devils. But because I had just left the NHL and I was back as sports director at KGO, I was an ABC station, so they would send me for several Olympics, I was happy to say. But in 88, when I went to Lake Placid, I had the advantage of knowing everybody. I knew all the coaches. I knew a lot of the players because they'd been in maybe the minor leagues at places I knew and the like. And so I was very comfortable. And so in the third period, when the third period started and the Mike Eruzione got a goal early in the third period, I immediately called KGO in San Francisco and said, "Look," I said, "it's going to sound ridiculous, but I said, you need to put me live on the air, and you need to line up every ABC station you can get on the West Coast and let me call this hockey game." Because a lot of people may not remember that game was on tape delay. There was no live broadcast of that game in 1980.
Wow.
And so I jumped in and did the call and did the last half of the Russia-USA hockey game. And the drama at that game was so incredible because it was more than just local, regional, like Cal Stanford. This was a huge thing for America as a sports fan. And, again, it was U.S.-Russia in those days. It was the Cold War and all that kind of thing. And so it was a very different atmosphere. So that was a pretty dramatic thing to be a part of.
I mean,
wow.
Yeah.
I had no idea about that.
No, I didn't
clue.
either. Everybody references the Al Michaels and stuff, and so wow, I didn't know that, Joe. You know, you were talking about some of your greatest calls. I think one of your best ones for Niner fans, Owens,
no doubt,
because you captured the moment of finally beating the Green Bay Packers.
Yep.
And everything that happened that day. I was in the stands with my grandfather. He used to have the old headphones, over the ears, and we would sit right in front of you in Section 8, right there. And I'll never forget that call because it felt like it captured the moment of every Niner fan running around the stadium, running around their living rooms, finally beating the Packers right then and there. I mean, that's to me my favorite call for you, Joe.
Well, I understand that because that's the way a lot of fans reacted, and I did too. I mean, I was frustrated as the team broadcaster that we would get to that game year after year, and it would be the Packers who would ruin our chance to go to the Super Bowl. In fact, to give you a little side story on that you might enjoy is that when Terrell Owens went into the Hall of Fame, I guess, 3-4 years ago now, he refused to show up at the event in Ohio because he was pouting over the fact they didn't get in sooner.
Yeah.
And which is kind of ridiculous, but he was, he's a true character. There's no doubt about that. But anyhow, there was had a kind of a sad thing. We were all at Dwight Clark's funeral and the reception afterwards, and I went up to Terrell and I said, Owens, I am really offended that you refused to show up at Canton, Ohio, for the Hall of Fame induction. He said, well, why would you care? I said, why would I care? Because I said, if you go into the Hall of Fame as you were supposed to, I would have been on national television yelling, Owens, Owens, Owens.
How did he respond?
And he laughed at that. So he was.
That is awesome.
Was he the biggest character that you covered?
Whew.
There have been some guys, but I'd say Marshawn Lynch is high on the list.
Yeah,
Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, that's a good call.
Yeah.
Him in the cart, the trainer cart.
Yeah, you're at Cal. Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah.
Marshawn Lynch. Now, did you think Aaron Rodgers? Because he's become a character now.
Joe,
we
wanted him. I wanted
we
the
all
Niners
wanted
to
him.
draft him so
we all
bad.
wanted him. But Aaron Rodgers, from what he was at Cal to who he is now, did you see this happening to Aaron Rodgers? This type of transformation.
It's hard to understand that. He was because he was so successful in his 2 years at Cal. I interviewed him a lot on the post-game shows, and one of the things that always jumped out at me is he would usually wear a Joe Montana T-shirt under his Cal uniform. He really wanted to be a 49er. Yeah. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And, in fact, I lobbied as much as I could with the front office saying, you guys really need to look at this guy. You need to draft this guy because they needed a quarterback. And, of course, they went for Alex Smith instead. But I thought Aaron was the most accurate quarterback I'd ever seen anywhere. His ability to throw into traffic and get to the right place. And the last game he ever had was an incredible game against Virginia Tech. Cal won 52-49 in Arizona in a bowl game. Yep. And so I just knew this guy was going to make it, period. But, at the college level, he wasn't nearly as sort of a character he's become today.
We're talking to Joe Starkey, longtime broadcaster for Cal Bears, of course, the 49ers from 1989 to 2008. He's a legend around these parts. He's a legend nationally. What are you going to miss the most about broadcasting, Joe?
Probably the opportunity to be part of the team, as it were, talk to players, talk to coaches, just that whole involvement you're in a common battle to be successful. I always enjoyed that. I mean, and the coaches. I mean, I had one of the great thrills for me was that for several years I was able to have a weekly meeting for a half hour to an hour every time with Bill Walsh. I mean, that was a great opportunity to learn football, to understand how he operated, to get to know him, how he made his decisions, things like that. And so I've really enjoyed the coaches, and a lot of the players are friends. For example, Gary Plummer not only played for Cal, but he ended up playing with the 49ers in their Super Bowl season, and then he became my partner after Wayne Walker retired. Yeah. And so there have been a lot of connections that that have been great, created great friendships and relationships.
You know, you obviously knew Bill Walsh, and we didn't, but to me, he's somebody that my father and my grandfather have told me how important he is to this community. You know, his obviously years and years at Stanford and everything he did with the 49ers. Him and Seaford, it feels like we've kind of forgotten about him. Is that because Bill passed away at such a young age that he's not around for his legacy to continue to be talked about and for him to go up on stage at Canton?
That's probably part of it, yeah. I mean, he died in his early 70s. And it was certainly a sad story that happened. And he quit prematurely too. I know he regretted quitting when he did. He really needed to step away that season when he did quit. He shouldn't have made the decision when he did. He needed to take a few months off and then decide whether or not to do it. And I think he always regretted going home when he did. Yeah. But he was always involved with the team. You know, they put him in the front office. He stayed close to the team, and and George Seifert was in a tough spot because Walsh was a charismatic leader who had created this dynasty, and George was a much more down, kind of quiet guy. You know, he was much more reserved, so it was a different kind of personality. But obviously, they both had great success.
Yeah. Should be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
George
absolutely. Heartbreaking losses. You've had so many of them, so many wins as well, but heartbreaking losses. I look at that 1990 NFC Championship game where Montana got knocked out and LT came up with the fumble on Roger Clegg. That's one of those ones that sticks in my head for your era. What's
Three-peat.
What's the biggest
one? That's it. I mean,
that's it?
I agree with you. That was the one that broke everybody's heart. I mean, we're about to do a three-peat, and all we got to do is run out the clock. And Roger Craig, who was such a great player and so steady and so consistent, and he has the fumble, and the Giants get the ball and they win the game, and it's like, what? Are you kidding? We just lost this game. It was over. I agree with you. I think that's the ultimate disappointing loss ever, and any loss to Dallas.
Yes.
Any loss 92. To Dallas.
92. 92. How about that phantom holding call? The phantom holding call on third play of the game where Rice goes 70, 80 yards, and they call a holding call on Guy McIntyre. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, even going through the Dallas airport one day with my wife, we were coming from somewhere, and she said, "What's the matter with you? You look grumpy. You look really upset." And I said, well, of course I'm upset. I'm in Dallas.
Joe, you're such a legend. Before you go, though, I got to ask you. You were there during the transition, Joe to Steve. You were there, and you were lobbying for Aaron Rodgers when it was, hey, do we select Alex Smith, Aaron Rodgers? You've seen all the different quarterbacks from when Mike Nolan and Alex Smith had their little disagreement over the shoulder injury. What's your thoughts on the Trey Lance, Jimmy Garoppolo situation that's currently going on? And maybe what are your thoughts on Trey Lance in general?
Well, as now more of an outsider, and I do pay attention to the team, of course, but he does look like he's got great potential. I think Garoppolo's greatest sin was he couldn't stay healthy. I mean, that's such a big factor. I mean, they're paying him a ton of money, and he would have some big games, but then there would be an injury. I mean, I can't even imagine... because I don't follow it as tight as I used to. He's had so many injuries, and so how do you, at that level, you can't afford that. You've got to have a guy who week in and week out is going to be there, and I think that had an enormous impact on their decision to do what they've done because Jimmy, for all his talent, couldn't stay healthy.
You've been involved in the game, broadcaster, for 52 years. Does it feel like 52 years? Has it felt like 52 years?
No, I'm sure like a lot of people, when you're at a certain young age and somebody older tells you, wait till you see how fast it goes, and you're like, oh yeah, right. Well, you know what? They're right. Yeah, it's a bit hard to believe that this is 50 years in sportscasting, and in a business I never even figured I'd ever get into to begin with. So the time flies, and you have memories of great teams and in great sports. I still have pals, believe it or not, from the Seals hockey team that I see. That goes back to the 70s, So I've been with a lot of different teams, and I've had a great time. So I've been extremely lucky. And but there comes a time when you think, you know what? I think maybe I don't want to carry this too far. I think I should leave when I'm still sharp.
Two people that have passed away in the last year that are very influential in broadcasting: John Madden and Vince Scully. Do you have any thoughts, or did you have any interactions that you'd like to share from either of those two? Well,
I met Scully a couple of times. In fact, I told my kids when he died, I said, I said, I've been in this business now a long time, and there's only one man that I've ever asked for an autographed picture from, and that was it, Vin Scully.
Wow.
And so that,
Wow.
but a Madden story that you'll probably like is that when I was working at KGO for a couple of years, we had a sports talk show that ran early evening, like at 6 o'clock in the evening, and they eventually dumped it and went to longer news shows. But one of my guests one night was John, and at that point we had a Raiders were on KGO for a while, and so one night John is my guest, and there's rumors that the team might be moving, but nobody's sure about that. And when we finished the talk show, John said, "Could you give me a ride over to the bus station?" He said, "I need to go home. I need a ride to go home. My wife's going to pick me up at the other end over in the East Bay." I said, "I'll take you home. No worry. I live in Walnut Creek." So we get in the car, and John says, he says, I'm trying to make a decision here. He said, CBS wants me to come in and talk to me about working on television. He said they want me to be a color guy. They want to put me on football games. This one, he was just working for Al Davis with the Raiders. He wasn't a coach anymore. And he said, I don't know. I don't think I'll fit into that. And I know, proud to say that. I said, "Are you kidding?" I said, "John, you will be incredibly successful as a football broadcaster." I said, "You've got all this energy, you got all this knowledge. Why would you not do this?" And I'm certainly didn't make the whole decision for him by any means, but he went off to New York, and the rest is history.
Wow, what a story.
Go ahead, Joe, before you get out of here, I just, on behalf of Bonta, all of our listeners, I've said this to you a couple times. I'm going to say it to you, for as many times as you'll come on. Thank you for being the soundtrack of me loving the 49ers for so many years. Without you, I wouldn't love the team the way I do, and it's because of the way that you put the plays that were happening on the field into my brain, and I would visualize it, and I just thank you for caring the way we care as fans.
Well, thank you. I'm honored that you guys have me on.
Hey, Joe, you're the best.
You're a legend.
The 96-yard Garrison Hurst overtime right against the Jets. That gets swept under the rug because of that Owens. But, man, whenever we went to Kettlestick Park, you were our soundtrack, like Shasky said, and you let the game breathe, man. You called it the way you called it, and it was awesome, man. So, hey, we're going to have you on before you retire.
Yes,
no doubt about it. We'll talk some Cal football next time. Joe, thanks for the time today.
Okay, guys. Take care.
Anytime, Joe Starkey. That was a lot of fun.
I'm clapping. I'm going to stand up now.